Hello everyone, happy Sunday. I'd already wished you a good Sunday yesterday, but then I decided to release the video that I released yesterday on Saturday because I was feeling inspired this weekend. Here is an offering of a second video. And in this video, we're going to continue exploring the topic of the persona versus the real self in Jungian psychology, and by extension in the various realms that we're interested in of personality types and personality theories. And I guess more specifically, how to tell them apart, because it's quite a fundamental challenge, isn't it? You want to become who you are. You want to become your true self. It's an INFJ, it's an INTP, something else. But how to be sure that you are on the way to becoming your true self and not deluding yourself by attaching yourself in the ego consciousness to the persona and becoming the slave to your persona, to the projection of a public image, what stands between the audience and your ego, rather than being in touch with the depths of your psyche so that you can embrace the whole and become yourself, with the capital S, as Jung likes to put it. If you're interested in this topic, stick with me. Just remember that I have written 2 books in the last year or so that are both relevant to this discussion and many others. The Ecstatic Soul, my book on the INFJ, and my new novel, The Infinite Castle, both less than $10 if you want to support me. All the links are down below in the description box. I will also direct you to a review of The Infinite Castle by Radish Raven, Ingrid of her name, who has a great channel. I think that her channel might be going on hiatus for a while. I'm not quite sure about that. I think I might have seen that in a video she released recently, but I link her review of my book, The Infinite Castle, this book. If you're curious to see her review, this might make you want to read the book. All right, so the persona. It's a great nemesis, I think, in many ways, for anyone willing to explore the personality. And yet, however much it is a nemesis, from a particular angle, the angle of self-transparency, you could call that. The angle of the journey to genuine individuation and not mock individuation, mock self-realization, a mere deluded fantasy that you have with yourself. For all these derogatory features of the persona, we're obliged to say that the journey to individuation and the journey to self-realization is also one that has to accept the existence of the persona, because the persona is an element in our psyche that is unavoidable. Jung makes that very clear everywhere he writes. Says the persona might have its aspects that we have to contend with, but that doesn't mean that we ought to hate the persona, or we ought to repress the persona, because if we're doing this, we're falling prey to a process that is, again, distancing us from the embrace of our whole psychic being. The persona is a part of it. That doesn't mean that we ought to live as if our persona were our self, but it means that we ought to live as if, or in such a way that we acknowledge that the persona is a part of ourself, and that in some situations we are going to be embracing traits of our persona, and that's okay, because it's, in some sense, it's absolutely necessary to functioning in society. The most simple example of this in nowadays, in today's society, and Jung refers to it in his books as well, so it was also the case back then, and that's not surprising. It's a work environment. None of us, except perhaps people who are writers, or people who are freelance, maybe in some specific type of jobs, almost none of us operates in the work environment with our real self, with our with what we would consider our authentic selves. We operate with a certain projection of what we expect others to see us as. So, for example, in my own work, I can sort of tell parts of the elements of my persona. Parts of the element of my persona are that I am a really positive person, that I'm welcoming, that I have ideas, that I am very motivated by everything that has to do with international developments in the global south. And there's many other aspects, and to some extent these traits exist in me, but they are really pronounced, in this kind of public self that I have in the workplace, and that is an element of my persona. The very fact of being aware that this is my persona, plus, and that's important, to not despise this, to accept it. It's part of what I am. It's a public persona. I don't hate it. I don't wish it didn't exist. I accept it, I acknowledge it. In some sense, I care for it. Okay, this is very much a part of your journey to individuation, psychic wholeness. You like your different parts. You care for your different parts. They might err, they might overstep their boundaries, but they are doing this because they're trying to protect you. And so caring for is a part of being whole. But all the same, I'm careful. I try to make sure that this persona I have in certain contexts doesn't become indistinguishable from my authentic self. But it's true that the question of the authentic self is a difficult one because, how do we know what our authentic self is? The fact that we cannot quite tell what our authentic self is all the more slippery, is all the more a slippery slope toward getting it confused with our persona. Because we know our persona. We inhabit it so much of the time in society. So at least it's something we're familiar with. So it's easy to attach ourselves to it, particularly as the persona being a creation of our consciousness, right? Is something that we have quite a bit of control over. And so we can make it something we like, something that we think is deserving of praise, of admiration, or at least of respect and dignity. And what would be better at first sight, on first encounter, than to identify with something that has all these great qualities. It's very tempting because it's known, it's approachable, it can be embodied, and it's likable. But it's something that has to be resisted within this journey to individuation. Now, as regards our particular problem with personality, with MBTI, with the INFJ type, with other types, is that just in the same way that we can have our persona at work and our persona in other public spaces, we can also have our MBTI persona. And in fact, I say can, but all of us do, I think, to some extent. And the question is, to what extent are we aware of it? And how influential is that MBTI persona on our self-presentation and on our self-understanding? Because when you're commenting on a YouTube channel, like myself, on a YouTube video, perhaps this very video, when you're contributing to a forum on personality and you are asked by that forum, what is your type? When you join a Discord and you identify as a certain type, what you do and how you communicate, no matter how much you would like to be completely transparently authentic, that's going to be colored by how you have been presenting yourself as. So someone who has entered on the forum, I am an INFJ, yes, they are going to some extent, on more or less subconsciously, write as if, according to their conception of what an INFJ is like. That's not to say that your entire behavior and being is going to be inauthentic, but the coloring is going to be there, and to be aware of it is part of individuation. The point is not to reject this, because it's inevitable. The persona is a part of our psyche, okay? So to be aware is not the same as to reject, because if you reject, you repress, sinks into the unconscious, and then it will re-emerge in a way that you have much less control over, and it will be much more archaic, much more infantile, and much more childish. So it's better to be aware of it and accept it in consciousness. And you can also have some control over it just by being aware that this INFJ persona is going to exist, okay? that's fine, I think. Again, that's not a problem, because that's never going to change. And someone who is completely enlightened in the Jungian terms is still going to have that persona, because again, psychic wholeness necessitates that that persona is accepted, along with all the unconscious contents and everything else, of course. But wholeness means everything is integrated, everything is accepted into the whole, nothing is rejected, including the persona. I think the problem emerges when someone really melts into and blends into their persona, and often that manifests, I think, from my observations, as people who speak as if they are completely embodying the INFJ personality, who are quick to tell others that they are probably mistyped INFJs. They don't seem to be able to speak outside of that particular role that they're embodying as an INFJ personality. You don't get the sense that you're meeting the person. It's like they're speaking like a book on the INFJ, rather than being a person who happens to be INFJ or identify as an INFJ. When you see people like that, and when I say INFJ, again, that can apply to INTJs, ISFPs, whatever it might be, then you might be dealing with a case, you might be witnessing a case of someone who is really blending with their persona and is erring as in ERR. My accent is erring probably is more correct, but in Irish sometimes you say erring, but it's ERR, erring on the way to individuation by being mixed up with their persona too much and thinking that their individuation as an INFJ or another type is actually real, whereas they're just falling prey to their persona, and they're going to make no progress in self-exploration, because if you get stuck with the persona, well, you're stuck. Okay. How can this person and any of us tell whether we are then really engaged in this process of discovering more and more of our consciousness and of our unconscious and integrating these contents? Whether, they be INFJ tinged contents, or whether they be INTP tinged contents, or ENFJ tinged contents, as the case may be, or we are just projecting and we're convincing ourselves of something. How can we tell? I can tell you what works in my case. I'm going to be modest in the sense that I'm not sure there is a catch-all solution. But I think that this idea, this approach that I have is probably going to work for a lot of people. When you look at yourself and you have thoughts about your type and thoughts about your person, similarly when you're talking to other people and you hear them speak about you or about things that you relate to, pay close attention to the things that you find particularly hurtful. Maybe you want to react and say something hurtful in return, even if the thing that was said was completely unintended as something hurtful to you. The things that make you just get really hot inside, things that really, you sense that you are just agitated by it, that your being resists it, even if there was no intention to hurt you. Pay close attention to these things, because these things are very likely to be the things that are not in your persona, that are in your unconscious, and that you're rejecting, even though you know that they are a part of you. And the fact that they are really rattling so much, again, the fact that it was not intended, either by other people or by your own thoughts, shows that there was no malicious design. So if they are hurting you, there must be a deep reason there, okay? And often it has to do with your shadow, it has to do with these complexes in your unconscious that you're rejecting. They might have to do with some functions that are not integrated in you, but they might also have to do with some contents in your previous life, in your childhood, and they might be tinged by these memories, but they might also have to do with some traits that you in your persona would deny that you have, right? Whereas they really exist, but they are in your unconscious. They make you feel angry or intense because you repress them. A very strong temptation, and I think a lot of us would be familiar with this temptation, is that when you express those, when you experience, these emotions, you're looking for safety straight away, because your identity is called into question, and for good reason, because you've been identifying strongly with your persona and these thoughts, these words of other people, of yourself. in some sense, they remind you that your persona is not the truth, is not the full truth, far from it. But so a first reflex when you're looking for safety is to say, no, I'm actually really, really like this, the persona, you know, and these things are just complete fabrications, and you will create all manner of subterfuges with yourself, with your mind, to convince yourself that really the persona is, you know, when you're doing, try to catch yourself doing this, because this is what is taking you away from individuation. It's what's taking you away from self-realization. And so pay attention to what hurts you. Pay attention to what wounds you. And ask yourself, where is that coming from? Instead of repressing it, instead of thinking that it's coming from some place that is, you know, you can't make sense of it, it doesn't make any sense. Maybe you're feeling a certain way because you woke up and you didn't sleep enough. Or maybe this person that said the things they said, they were really trying to hurt you. No, they weren't. It's wounding you because it's something that you haven't really acknowledged. It's probably part of these shadow contents, or part of this unconscious content that you're not willing to face. Becoming your full self with a capital S is part of it. And it is true that there is an expression of it at the level of personality type. It's a much bigger topic, but there is an expression of it at the level of personality type. And I have met people like this, who have, you know, who are given an account nowadays of this. Particularly, it happens to people who used to identify very strongly as INFJ and who made their coming out as another type in the meantime. For example, as INFPs, or as ENFPs, or as INTPs, or whatever it might be. But there's a lot of INFPs and ENFPs, as you might imagine. And they might say, well, it was really, really hard at first to admit it, because I had strongly identified with the INFJ personality. This is a very strong case of persona identification, isn't it? Persona identification, pardon me. And all these resistances are expressions of the persona trying to hold on to what they like about it. Because perhaps the more INFP traits were traits that were not valued. But they've embraced it since then. They've acknowledged it. Perhaps at first they didn't love it very much, but the journey to appreciation takes a while. The thing is that when you get to a point where you accept it, you're accepting something that is much bigger as a part of you than what you were liking before, which was this, in the end, or rather shallow projection of a persona. But it's, as I hope I've been able to showcase a little bit, it's a very deep process, a very long process, and it's not easy. But pay attention. What is hurting you? What is wounding you? For example, if we're talking about type, when your type is discussed, are you completely comfortable? Or are you quick to react and to get defensive about your type? And if that's the case, why? Ask yourself why. Because it might come from your unconscious telling you, maybe you're not the type you think you are. It might be something else. It might be an unconscious content of completely different nature. But it can really happen in the case of type, and it's often the best way to figure out whether, you know, your type identification has to do with your persona or with your bigger self. See you soon, guys. Don't forget, I have a Patreon page that you can join. Link below. Become a Jungian certified existentialist and make any suggestions for videos to me. Bye-bye.